Today, we're going to be talking about Slack and not the Slack that you're thinking of, probably, even though we will be touching on how Slack influenced the Slack that we're going to be talking about. But we're going to be talking about Slack, the book written by the author Tom DeMarco in the 1990s, particularly how Slack is the counter opposite of efficiency and what that means for productivity within the workplace. So let's just get over some of these notes that I looked into and talk a little bit more about them. So Slack is the natural enemy of efficiency, and efficiency is the natural enemy of Slack. So to me, what this means is that when you are striving for utter efficiency, you lock your process down in a way that you won't be able to retain the flexibility of adaptation to new situations that come up. I kind of agree and I kind of disagree with this. As you know, on this channel, I've posted a video about checklists before and my usage of templating checklists. And I think if you have an evolving checklist system, you can keep the benefits of both. You can have the efficiency because you can go through the list of steps that you need to do to accomplish some kind of goal, but you can also take advantage of the freedom of being able to very quickly change and adapt to things that don't exist anymore. It is in the middle of the organization where reinvention takes place. So to me, this means that when you are really high up in an organization, you don't have enough. You basically control the delegation, but you're not actually working on anything yourself at the end of the day, right? A leader of an organization has a hierarchy org where they are responsible for making sure that everything happens according to the long-term goals of the company. However, so basically the people who are down here on the job level are the ones who are actually doing the implementing. These are the individual contributors of an organization, and basically their role is to fulfill what the CEO wants to accomplish. But for that to become the case, there are people who need to basically serve as the translation layer between the CEO's desires and the work done by the individual contributors. And I've talked about this in the past before, specifically as it's come to communication between different teams within organizations, and how the job of individual contributors is to make stuff, and then the department head, manager's job is to distill that information and pass it back up to the CEO, and then receive new kind of dictants from the CEO to pursue, and then pass back down to the individual contributors as tasks that team is specifically established to execute against. Slack is the time when you are 0% busy. So I think that this really kind of ties into the idea of freewheeling thinking, where you can kind of just go on walks and you can really kind of sit with your thoughts and ideas. And I think we actually looked at this a little bit before when we discussed the topic of solvitur ambulato, which is the concept of it is solved by walking, it being the long-term thing that you're trying to solve for, or you have some time to tear apart the problem in your head and really kind of take a look at it from a deeper perspective. So this is interesting because I think this actually ties into our modern day conception of business operations, which is Slack, the application, right? Slack, the application, puts us in a world where a lot of us are always operating from the back foot because we're constantly getting communicated at and having new things drop onto our plate that we don't have time to really process. Thought leaders in the workspace like Cal Newport talk a lot about this, particularly in his newest book, A World Without Email. And in this book, Cal Newport's main thesis is that the hyperactive hive mind of communication is what really drives the anxiety at work and also kind of leads the workplace to feel a lot more stressful than it might need to be for the problems that are getting solved. Tom DeMarco has been writing about these ideas in the 1990s. So this was pretty much right before, I would say, the big kind of takeoff of a lot of these kind of knowledge works. This was before the Web 1.0 takeoff, or maybe during the Web 1.0 takeoff. And now that we kind of firmly live in a world that's remote, where we're all kind of on Slack all the time, it's interesting to see how this relationship for workers has evolved. The waste associated with time sharing between two tasks is the sum of time lost to the mechanics of the switch plus rework required upon restart, plus immersion, plus time, plus frustration costs. You pay the penalty each time you switch. So context switching is interesting because what happens when you switch context is that you take on the tax of the setup price of switching to a new thing. So if you are making a sandwich and you take the bread out, then you put the bread back, then you take the mayo out, then you put the mayo back, you take the meat out, and you put the meat back. All of these steps require extra work where you could have accomplished the same thing by just batching it and taking out all the things at the same time. So in this hyperactive kind of hive work state where managers are kind of like micromanaging individual contributors and CEOs are kind of panicking about long-term goals, what you'll get is a lot of running around with your head cut off. You'll get an organization that switches context a lot to different meetings in particular, right? So you get someone who has like a meeting schedule that looks like this, where it's just this crazy amount of context switching. It's like, oh, I have to jump from this meeting and talk to this person about something in particular, and then I have to think about this one, and then kind of like go over this, and that's a quick recipe for burnout. It's really easy to burn out in this type of world with this type of schedule in particular, because you'll feel very fragmented, you'll feel very torn up. And as a matter of fact, in the book Slack, Tom talks about this as well. With fragmented knowledge workers may look busy, but a lot of their busyness is just thrashing, switching continually from one activity to another. Because in modern knowledge work, nothing is ever static. So a way to think about this is that because things are always moving, and because they're intangible output that you deliver to your bosses or to your clients, in my case, when I do consulting work, to you as a viewer right now, there's a lot of different ways that the intangibility of these results can cause a lot of pulling in different directions. So to be able to batch, and in my case, what that means batching is that I actually batch video record. So you'll notice that in the last 3 videos that I've released on this channel, I was wearing the same shirt. And in the next 3 videos on this channel, I'm going to be wearing the same shirt. And the reason for that is that I get all my camera and microphone set up, and I record 3 videos at once and then schedule them for separate releases. And the reason that I do that is because I'm trying to decrease this amount of fragmenting. I'm trying to decrease this cost that's incurred by immersion switching and this penalty that comes from that. So I think it's really important as a knowledge worker to think about the penalty that you pay each time that you try and switch between something. I think that this is a hypercritical way of kind of, again, paying attention to burnout. Also paying attention to how fragmented your work is a really good way of knowing how efficient, or in this case, effective, you can become. And to be able to find this more effectiveness, you should add more slack to your schedule, because adding more slack and removing this kind of slack will give you the time to really take a look at the longer term horizon and where you can kind of batch this and minimize these context switching for the important work. So now we're going to switch topics to control. So a little bit further in the book here, I liked this quote: "Control, as they see it, is their payment for working. Deny the control or assume it yourself and they're gone." This, I think, has to do again with this kind of org chart where managers have to tread really carefully with knowledge workers, because people in general don't like to be told what to do. I find that no matter what age a person is, they have not, in a teenage situation, people might call it like a rebellious streak, but I don't really think it's rebellion. I think people just really need autonomy. When people are being held down or told what to do by higher ups within their organization, it kind of ruins their ability to think for themselves, and people don't like to not be able to think for themselves. So control, especially for people who are well college educated and people who have a background in understanding complex topics, don't like giving up this control. And I, for one, am in complete agreements that I would be more than happy to give up real salary to get control back. And that's the way that I've kind of operated with both my content creation as well as building stenography. And I built it in a way when I didn't take VC money because I wanted to maintain control. I didn't want to cede control to another organization that would be able to tell me how to run my business, for example. And there comes trade-offs with that, but I think control is a almost intangible good where once you give it up, it's much harder to get it back. Oliver arrives the day after Oren departs. I think you'll agree that Oliver is essentially useless on his first day, since most of what he's doing is getting his bearings. This too is a part of the acquisition of domain knowledge. He's even worse than useless, as he's using up other people's time to get him jump started. This is interesting because this refers to the context switching thing that we were just talking about, the thrashing that comes from being in a lot of different contextual situations. But I think more importantly, it talks about knowledge transfer. So here the author is talking a little bit about domain knowledge within your organization. And when I saw that, I thought about how knowledge transfer is conducted. If you've ever heard of the busload principle, for example, the bus factor is a measurement of risk resulting from the information and capabilities not being shared among team members, derived from the phrase, "in case case they get hit by a bus. It is also known as the bus problem, whatever, blah, blah, blah. The concept is similar to the idea of a key person risk, but considers the consequences of losing key technical experts versus financial or managerial executives who are theoretically replaceable at an insurable cost. Personnel must both be key and irreplaceable to contribute to the bus factor. Losing a replaceable non-key person would not result in the bus factor effect. So the way that I think about this is that when Oliver, let's say that Oliver is a key developer, or Oren is a key developer for the project of the organization. So when Oren leaves the organization, Oren leaves a vacuum in which the Oliver has to fill the place of not only just what Oren knew, but supplying his own knowledge to the future growth of the project. So what the author means is saying that Oliver is less than useless, is that he is using up other people's time to basically say, hey, what did you know about Oren? Because Oren's knowledge most likely is highly fragmented through many different parts of the organization. It might be hidden partially in code bases. It might be hidden in Jira tickets. It might be hidden in documents that are like throughout the organization. It might be like information that he was talking about at the lunch table, right? So this information doesn't really sit in any given singular vault or representation of knowledge. And what that means is that when the team loses Oren, they lose the ability to act upon that knowledge. So Oliver has to take what he can find, basically almost as like an archaeologist, and rebuild Oliver from the ground up. The stars had long before taken whatever steps were necessary to establish good connections. They had spread around favors, been responsive themselves, nursed relationships, seen to other people's essential human needs. The stars had richer connection than their peers. To establish a standardized way of doing any knowledge task, you end up focusing on the mechanics of the task, but the mechanics are a small and typically not very important portion of the whole. How the work goes on inside the nodes of the worker diagram is not nearly so important as how wide and rich are the connections. In modern knowledge work, nothing is ever static. Communication in healthy companies takes place in the white space. So I think what this means is that the stars that are being referred to here are basically the best employees, right? Like these are the people within the organization of the team that are taking the extra step to make sure that they're focusing on the depth and density of the connections of the organization as opposed to focusing on just the technical output. I agree and I disagree. Again, I think that being able to think about depth and connections doesn't mean just immediate depth and connections. I think it can also be throughout time, which is why I pay so much attention to leaving behind good, solid knowledge, because I do firmly believe that being able to access that knowledge for people in the future is valuable, and being able to establish a kind of clearness comes through writing and comes through understanding the thing that you're trying to get across. That being said, there is a reality where people will implement details. And as we just said before, with this fragmented knowledge, with what happened after Oren left the organization, we lose that knowledge, right? We lose that knowledge because Oren hid it amongst multiple of his colleagues unintentionally and multiple places on the intranet of the company or whatever organization that we're working at. A lot of this book is obviously very heavily driven towards like organizations. So it's like organizational management. I don't really work in organizations as much as I did in the past. So this is from my own anecdotal experience in the past too, from kind of referencing what would happen when people left the organization and new people came in, and what would happen when projects got dropped and how that would affect people's psyche within the organization. But all in all, basically what this author I think is trying to get across with this book is that it's really important to pay attention to not just the verticals of a operation like you see here, where this is just a vertical line. It's actually more important to pay attention to what goes on here in the white space. In the white space here, we have a lot more kind of communication between departments. We have people interacting with each other. We have projects that move in nonlinear ways that wouldn't have happened if things just moved up and down the org chart. When the new automation is in place, there is less total work to be done by the human worker, but what work is left is harder. That is the paradox of automation. It makes the work harder, not easier. After all, it was the easy stuff that got absorbed into the machine. So what's left is, by almost definition, fuzzier, less mechanical, and more complex. I actually really love this quote. I think that when I'm obsessed with automation, obviously, as a person who spends a bunch of time with Obsidian and artificial intelligence. And I think about this a lot. I think about, oh, wow, when I'm automating something, I'm removing the part of it that is easy, right? Or it's the repeatable. But I don't necessarily think that that's, this idea of harder, not easier is exactly what the author is trying to get across. I think that when you have something that's harder, that's the thing that's more satisfying and more human to me. Not harder in the sense like this is like not worth doing. The problem is when you have to do a bunch of easy task as well to get to the hard task. So the way that I see automation is kind of like what he was referring to up here with the time penalty switching, where I am in the business of automating things out that can get me started so I can just focus on the hard stuff. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about empowerment. You can't empower anyone without taking chances. The power you've granted is the power to err. If that person messes up, you take the consequences. Looked at from the opposite perspective, it is this capacity to injure the person above you that makes empowerment work. So basically, this is a factor of trust between two people. Here I have Gon and Killua from HXH, who Hunter x Hunter HXH, who trust each other implicitly because of both the experiences that they shared, but also their personalities and their kind of codependence at times. But I think that to really kind of grow as a human, to grow as a character, to grow as an organizational asset, you really need to think about how, if you were a manager, how to give the people who work below you chances fuck up. Basically, the idea is that you need to give people the ability to take consequences and then use those consequences to leverage growth. And if you, what I mean by that is that if you are able to swallow the consequence for them, it gives them ability to kind of get hurt and come back home and learn a lesson. And referring back again to the idea of autonomy, people really like this, right? People really like being able to try things, and if they know that you are in their best interest, or if you are the person, the managee. For example, when I've had managers who have allowed me to take on new projects that were a little bit risky, but could come out with nonlinear gains for the organization, I wanted to work the hardest on those projects. And when I had managers that were breathing down my throat and telling me, you can't use this software, you have to use this software or whatever, we immediately, like, the relationship fell apart between our organizational chart, and it affected the rest of the team too, because you can't really have an organizational management system where you are working in a team and have one direct report not be happy and not have it spread toxicity to the other siblings as well, and maybe even seep over into other departments if it gets really bad. So I think it's really important to give people autonomy, and I think a lot of that can be done through automation and kind of decreasing bus load by sharing the right domain knowledge in the right places. So all of this, I think, kind of comes together. Overall, I think this is a pretty good book. Tom DeMarco is doing, I think, a pretty good job of talking about the ideas that are kind of like counterintuitive to the way that a lot of businesses that we know of today and how they operate, which is kind of just like go, 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 always stay online, always respond to this person, where you save the documentation, it doesn't matter, as long as you just constantly have the look of being busy. And the look of being busy, of busyness, is a critical culture error in the way that the United States is run, and hopefully something that we can fix going forward into the future. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, do the things, check out stenography if you are into coding, and I will see you next time. I've been Bram, you've been you, wait, backwards. Anyway, have a good day.